It is 6 o'clock. Welcome. Today is Thursday, April 9th. This is the Olentangy Local Schools Board of Education regular meeting. This is a business session. We will be voting on action items. With that, please call the roll, Mr. Kern.
Mr. Bartz?
Here.
Mrs. Fiesel?
Here.
Mr. King?
Here.
Mr. White?
Here.
Mr. O'Brien?
I am here. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, first agenda item is to approve the agenda, and there was an addendum to the agenda supplied via email as well as hard copy at your seat. So I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda as addended.
So moved.
Seconded.
Any discussion on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, please call the roll.
Mrs. Fiesel?
Yes.
Mr. Bartz?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. White?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes. Okay, we move right into our first and only presentation item. It's the presentation from the Auditor of State. It's an award by Tim Kraft for financial reporting. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Welcome.
Yeah, it's my honor and pleasure to be here. Usually, like I always like to joke, usually when the Auditor of State comes knocking, it's not always bringing good news, but tonight's one of those nights I get to bring good news. And it seems like I'm coming here every year to present good news, which is a good thing for your school treasurer here, Brian. I'm here tonight to present the Auditor of State's Award with distinction. The Auditor of State Award is awarded to those entities that file an annual CAFR and a timely financial report in accordance with the GAAP, as well as receive a clean audit report. The clean audit report means that your financial audit did not contain any findings for recovery, material citation, material weakness, and significant deficiency, single audit findings, or any questionable cost. That's kind of like the audit speak of it. What I like to talk about with this audit is that the Auditor of State's audits 5,800 public entities, from the Ohio State University to the smallest township in the state of Ohio to the smallest library. Out of those 5,800 public entities, roughly only 5% of them qualify for this award. So that's to say that your Treasury Department is working in the 95th percentile, and not here being at a school, you aced your audit, I guess is a fun way to say it. So, and to win it year and year after year is an amazing thing for Brian Kurtz and his staff. So with that, I would like to present Brian with his Auditor of State Award with distinction. Congratulations.
Go to the chair.
Thank you.
Great. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Brian, and your entire team. Next item is the board presence report. I've got three things I want to cover. Let me start with, I want to give the public, staff, all of our Olentangy families an update on where we are regarding the situation with a former teacher at Arrowhead Elementary School. From the very beginning, we worked closely with Sheriff Russ Martin and Prosecutor Carol O'Brien. We've let them know that we will cooperate in their important work and will assist however we can. Sheriff Martin has briefed this board in person, and he and his staff have been standing shoulder to shoulder with us as we all work to help this community heal from the betrayal of this former teacher. We also have provided resources, compassion, caring for the students and families who have been directly or indirectly affected by these tragic events. Our counselors have the sensitivity and expertise to help the children who have questions about what they may have heard, and to help families try and make some sense of these senseless acts. When we notified this former teacher that we were preparing to take quick and aggressive action to terminate his employment, he quickly submitted his resignation, which we accepted. He will receive no additional benefits from resigning. Waiting to be fired. But the district now has the benefit of immediately and permanently severing its ties to this individual. While it's doubtful he'll be free to walk the streets anytime soon, if at all, we've notified this former teacher that he is prohibited from setting foot on our school property for any reason ever again. We've also worked with the State Department of Education to request an immediate revocation of his teaching license, and we worked with Prosecutor O'Brien to ensure that the former teacher's state retirement account is frozen so that it may be potentially available to those he victimized. We're also undertaking multiple reviews to find ways to add to the 20 safeguards we already have in place to protect our students. Our mission has been and will continue to be keeping kids safe so they can learn and excel. In the days ahead, we'll be announcing a series of Olentangy school and community events that will help us all begin to heal from this tragedy. We will invite everyone to join us in these important steps towards uniting and strengthening our community. The second item is just quickly on the superintendent search. We have gone ahead and selected OSBA to perform the search. We're in the process of scheduling a special meeting for the 28th. I believe Terry's heard from everyone but Mr. White on availability for the 28th. And the goal remains to have a new superintendent under contract for August 1st of 2015. Lastly, as you may recall, the board continues to defend itself in a lawsuit brought by Mr. White, where he claims the board violated the Ohio Sunshine or Public Disclosure Law. His lawsuit, which was unsuccessful in both its initial filing in Delaware County and his initial appeal, was presented to the Ohio Supreme Court for consideration. We were informed yesterday that the Ohio Supreme Court, by a 5-2 vote, has decided to hear the case. It's our understanding that this process will not be complete until November or later, after numerous motions, files, and pleadings will be held. We remain confident in our defense and committed to defending ourselves against Mr. White's claims. Okay, any questions on the President's report? All right, Dr. Lucas, you're up. Superintendent's report.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I welcome everyone to April, and it's been a very, very busy month already, as you can see by the additional personnel items that we have on the agenda. This is, as they say, the hiring season. You'll continue to see addendums such as we have tonight for the next month or so. Good things happening in the school district. We have the Fairfield Crystal Classic Show Choir competition. The Olentangy Keynotes were the grand champions of that competition. This is also usually the time, as you know, between winter and the spring when we start getting our arts festivals and our music programs and our plays taking place. So you're going to see most of these good things taking place would be more on the arts side of the school district, and we're very, very proud of the talents that we have. Our National Geographic Bee State Champion, we have the individual, and as you know by policy, we put first name only, from Shanahan Middle School, headed to the Nationals in Washington, D.C., and that will be May 11th through the 13th. Very proud of that individual. Columbus Children's Choir Voice of the City, grand prize winner. And again, that's from Hyatt's Middle School. And the Ohio University Scripps Regional Spelling Bee, we had a second place overhaul from Shanahan Middle School. So we're extremely proud of those individuals. This piece of art we wanted to definitely showcase for the superintendent's report. We had the National Scholastic Art Gold Medal Award and American Visions Medal recipient, Amanda from Orange High School, for, as you see the title, the Zodiac Race painting. You can't really appreciate this on this screen right here, but detail is absolutely unbelievable. And we have some very talented individuals in our school district, and this is a great piece of art, so we wanted to make sure we showcase that. Other good things happening in the district, we have the Olentangy Food Service named the best in the region, and that is according to the website niche.com, based on public feedback and also based on expense per student. So I know we usually get a report every year before the board in regard to our nutrition and food service program, and we're very proud of the work that they do. Discussion items that you will hear this evening, we have, first of all, we have the drug testing, just a little bit about that. This was a request from the board approximately 3 to 4 months ago. More of an update on how our drug testing program is going. You're going to hear from Linda Martin, Mary Kay Balmer, and Mark Rafe in regard to that, and we will have a discussion on that in regard to the direction that program is going. Future planning, I see that we have some individuals from our committee here. Linda and Krista will start that. We may have some input from some of our community members on that committee to talk a little bit about what it looks like from an attendance standpoint, attendance boundaries, different situations in the future of how the district is continuing to grow and what areas are growing. Last but not least, we will have our fiber services contract from Jeff Gordon. That's basically our E-rate and our reimbursement of that E-rate. We've had some changes over last year, and I wanted to make sure that Mr. Gordon was able to answer any and all questions that the board would have in regard to that, because next meeting we'll be coming back for approval of that E-rate contract. Other agenda items, we have preschool peer program tuition rates, again, increasing for half-day, $20 a month, for full-day, $30 a month. Those would be the individuals that attend our preschool program and are considered preschool peers. We also have the K-5 English Language Arts materials, and we have a landscape contract coming up. As you know, the weather finally is changing, so we'll be looking for approval of our landscape design nursery farm to do our landscaping. Important dates. Here's one that definitely wants you to pencil in because it goes right with most of that artwork we already discussed. Sunday, April 19th from noon to 4, the Spring Arts Festival. I know I've seen most of you there. It's a great day. All three high schools will be highlighting many projects from our students. I would highly recommend, if you get the opportunity on Sunday, April 19th, to come and see what types of talents that we have in this school district. We also have board business meetings, Thursday, April 30th. These are, by the way, 6 p.m. starts. This will be the Student Achievement Award. If you recall, Olentangy High School, I think we used to call that Plackapalooza. There'll be many awards going out, and it will be a great evening. May 14th, we have the Community Service Awards, and that will be in the administrative offices. Senior Awards programs, also another great time. We're really starting to squeeze a lot of things in because I believe it's May 17th is graduation day, and Senior Awards will take place Tuesday, May 5th, 7 o'clock, Liberty and Orange, 7:30, Olentangy. I know it's going to be very hard for all of you to be in all three spots, so I think I have talked to some that you're splitting some of that up. Our goal eventually is to get that back onto separate nights so that you can attend all three. We're not there yet, but we do appreciate you coming out to those because I think, as you all know, those of you that have been there, that's the best of the best that we have to offer in the Olentangy local schools. And you see some individuals that have some very bright futures ahead of them. So that will be Tuesday, May 5th. That concludes my report. I would entertain any questions from the board at this time. Thank you.
For Dr. Lucas? No? Thank you, Dr. Lucas. Okay, Mr. Kern, Treasurer's Report.
Yes, just a few action items this evening, just the usuals, approving of minutes, the financials, appropriations, and donations. Just a few things to touch upon as far as action items. You have the financial report for February. I just want to touch on a few things. We did get all our real estate taxes on the receipts. All are in by the end of February. Typically that rolls into March, so we've collected all real estate taxes for the year, and we're approximately 1.3% above what we had expected from the October forecast. So we'll make a change as we go into here for, I see Dr. Lucas chuckling there.
I think it's a good thing.
Yes, it is a good thing. As we go into the May forecast update, which, by the way, Monday, the 13th at 6:30 in this room will be the Audit and Finance Committee meeting to go over the assumptions of the 5-year forecast. So that's about $1.7 million compared with where we were at in the fall. So that's a good thing. As far as expenses are concerned, we're trending pretty much on par, except for retirement and benefits, and that's due to our medical insurance. We had expected approximately 10% or larger increase, and we're coming in at 0, of course, this year. So you're starting to see that positive variance as we get through. It should fall out to about $1 million savings for the 6 months. It's $2 million on an annualized basis. So that's good news going forward. Any changes, of course, will be, as we see projecting going out, will be made, of course, in the May forecast, plus along with budgets. All departments are in an actual reviewing of the subcommittee. Tomorrow we have 2 individuals of the Finance Committee that we go over and review all the department budgets for the general fund and the building budgets for the general fund. So review those and kind of go over theirs, and if any updates we got to give to the full committee. So all that will be adjusted in the May forecast. Also, too, is appropriation changes. You notice one really big one there. Addition for the bond retirement. While for the bond refunding, no money comes in and no money technically goes out, actual cash, we actually do have to book it. It's a book entry that we have to have. Well, to be able to do that, we have to have the appropriations adjusted to be able to do that. So that's why you see that large bond refunding appropriation adjustment. And then last but not least, we do have some donations. We have some technology purchases for Heritage Elementary, totaling about $17,000 for some smart boards and classroom magazines. So it is the big one, along with Indian Springs PTO to Indian Springs Elementary, some PE equipment, benchmark assessment, projectors, and such. So various items. So we appreciate all our, it's not all of them, but we appreciate our PTOs and our community and their donations. And then one last thing, I know I've said this before, just a reminder, April 15th, not only is it tax day, but for the board, myself, Dr. Lucas, and Mr. Gordon is ethics filing deadline. So that's all I have. Any questions?
Nope. All right, terrific. So next agenda items, public participation, session number 1 for general comments.
There is
Nothing. All right, we'll go right into the discussion items. First up is item A on drug testing. Ms. Martin, Ms. Bulmer, and Mr. Rafe.
Standing here by myself. Good evening, everybody. As Dr. Lucas said, this has been a request from the board, and it's rather timely because it's following on the heels of Tuesday's PPT drug program that they had put on over at Orange. So I have with me tonight Mary Kay Balmer, and Mary Kay is a newly contracted service we have this year, and I'll let her tell a little bit more about that. And then Mr. Rafe will go over some information of what we are doing currently, and in addition to that, talk about some of the information that Mary Kay is going to pass out for you right now. I have 3 pieces for you to take a look at. The first piece is some basic information, some data that I thought you might be interested in looking at. It talks about the current program. We use SportsSafe for our testing program, and the number of students that are in that program currently and each year for the past 3 years, and the cost for this current year. Number 2 is the student information. I have the number of suspensions that have been related to substance use for the past 5 years, Under students, I also have extracurricular participation. In case you're interested, how many students do we have in extracurriculars, total numbers? And those are for the past 3 years. Those are not duplicated numbers, by the way. And those are in non-graded extracurricular programs. And then below that, I also included, I thought for your interest, the number of student parking permits that we have at each of the buildings for this current year. I thought you might want to have that kind of information in case you want to look at that. And at the very bottom, just some information on the testing options, the different testing options that they have, and the cost for each of those different options. Do you have that as well? Yes. Okay, and that's from the Sports Safe front page of their website. And so I also included, as I just mentioned, the Sports Safe front page, some of the information. Oftentimes, we are asked the question, which test is most accurate? Why do you do it? For what reason? How long does it take for the results to come back? And I've included that. And in addition to that information, I've also included your current board policy 553001, in case down the road through discussion you want to further examine that language and consider different options. So I'd like to introduce Mary Kay Balmer. Mary Kay, you want to come up and say a few words?
Hello, as Linda introduced me, my name is Mary Kay Balmer, and I am part owner of a new business that's called Stratus High School Recovery Communities. I was tasked by Dr. Lucas and Ms. Martin to develop this program for the Olentangy School District. And so what I'm doing with this program is I'm specifically working out of the Olentangy Academy and specifically with the Oasis School. And so what I'm doing is I have set up assessments. I am doing individual sessions. I have developed an intensive outpatient substance abuse program for students who are at Oasis. Unfortunately, right now, there pretty much is not much in the way of any programs in the Central Ohio area anymore for teenagers who have drug and alcohol problems. So I thought what a great way to be able to bring it to the communities and make it much more easily accessible by having it within the high schools. Hopefully within the next couple of years or so, there will be more than just me. And I'll be able to hopefully shop this program to other school districts as well. But the Olentangy School District is the pilot program. Let's see here. Currently, I'm working with 3 kids in my intensive outpatient program. It looks like I might be getting one more next week. I've developed what I'm calling a modified intensive outpatient program, and one of those clients is actually at a different school, and I'm going to see him at his other school a couple times a week. I'm doing 4 kids I'm doing individual sessions with weekly, and 2 other ones have actually come to me and asked me to provide services for them for mental health disorders. So I am at the school every single day. I'm there to provide crisis management services. So if a kid has any type of problem at all, they can come to my office anytime during the school day, and I help them work through that. Part of my programs, I'm working with Chris France, who's part owner of Sports Safe, to be able to provide urine drug screening services for all of my clients in all levels of care. So that will be available for all of those clients. And we're still in the working stages of that, and hopefully by the end of this month that will get started also. Thank you.
Mr. Rafe, would you like to talk a little bit about our current program and what we do currently in the district and how that operates?
Thank you. As you know, we've had drug testing in place for quite some time here in the district. There was a year where we did suspend the drug testing program, random drug testing program of student athletes for 1 year due to budgetary constraints, but then brought it back on a fee-based basis. Currently, we the program is totally random, so all of the athletes, as they enter the high school in 9th grade, as they begin participating in athletics, get entered into a database that is provided to Sports Safe, and then they generate a random list each week, and bring it to the school and deliver it to the athletic director, who then determines or then starts calling students down for drug testing. We typically do the drug testing during lunch periods, randomly try to change when we do the drug testing to minimize the risk of students taking measures to fake their drug tests, because that's something, we're always looking at ways we can try to strengthen our collection procedures. But typically, we test about 30 student athletes every week. We test for all types of drugs, marijuana, cocaine, any of the prescription drugs, the whole battery of drugs. We are able to test for alcohol. The window of detection for alcohol is much smaller, so typically the kids would have had to have consumed alcohol the night before in order to detect alcohol use. So the ways we try to strengthen the collection procedures is to vary the lunch periods that we do the testing. The athletic directors have different procedures in place to have kids empty their pockets or remove any outer clothing where they could be hiding fake urine samples or paraphernalia that helps them mask drug testing. They're, the ones who are using, unfortunately, are pretty savvy. Trying to stay one step ahead of that. We escort students to the testing sites. We try to randomize the days. We used to do random drug tests of every student athlete in the program. So every athlete would be tested prior to the start of every season. So we found, though, over the years is that we were getting very few results from those screenings because the kids knew the tests were coming. So we were essentially throwing away quite a bit of money to do that testing because we weren't, they knew that they were going to get tested on the first of the season or the beginning of the season. We've talked about one of the ways we talked about, especially strengthening the collection procedures, taking it out of the school day and testing kids when they're in their practice. So pulling them out of a practice to test them rather than, because now we know they can't. But again, we're staying one step ahead is an ongoing battle with them. The pool of athletes we select, so every student, once you are a student athlete in the system, you're in the drug testing pool. The database is updated every sports season, so in sports seasons versus out of sport athletes, the pool of kids, so the 30 kids we select randomly for the test, 80% of those kids are in-season athletes. So during the fall seasons, they're fall season athletes, winter season athletes, and so on. The other 20% of the kids are out-of-season athletes. So just because you're not currently in season doesn't mean you could get picked. One thing we've talked about is randomly just selecting a team for testing. But every time we make a decision about whether or not we select a team, every time we make a decision about who we select, we're reducing the randomization of it and then presenting ourselves to be in a position where we may be selecting certain students for testing, and we need to try to, from a legal standpoint, we need to minimize that because the program needs to be random. You can't just target particular students or particular athletes. We do let, if a parent is suspicious and the parent calls us and requests, we will put a name in a pool to be cooperative with those parents, but we don't get many of those types of calls. So I know you have all the numbers on how many we've tested year by year. One number, did you want them to have the number of positives?
What's the most common drug or drugs?
Marijuana is the most common one we do detect.
Sorry, a couple of questions.
Go right ahead.
about that. So one, what if a student refuses to participate?
If they refuse to participate, they're automatically considered a positive, and they have a law, the denial of participation. They can select themselves out of the drug testing program. They have to inform us in writing that they want to be selected out of the drug testing program. If they're an underclass student, a freshman, a sophomore, then they're automatically considered a positive also. So they can't just select themselves out and then jump back in when they go back in season. And basically, they play a fall sport, select themselves out for winter and spring, and then come back in the next fall.
So if you play multiple sports, are you in there twice and 3 times, so you're more likely to be tested?
I guess given the way the random numbers are generated, your chance of being selected should stay constant.
Buying a lottery ticket, I guess.
Yeah, right. But I tell you, we do have kids who get pulled times, and because again, it's random.
So if you test and fail, you're more likely to be tested a second time?
If they're tested positive, then they have to be, in order to return to participation, they have to be tested for 5 consecutive weeks. So they're denied. There is a denial of participation, and that typically coincides with a time frame. They'll still be getting tested, and they could have returned to play because of the number of games they may have sat out could be over before 5 weeks is up because of how the games fall.
Mm-hmm.
But what they want to see is and it's very interesting to see how the levels are detected, how high the levels are of whatever the type of drug is. So if they're going to be tested in multiple weeks, they can tell that, because through the testing, that if we use marijuana as example, they would say they used marijuana in the last day, in the last week, in the last month, because for marijuana testing, it's a 30-day window. But so when they do the subsequent test, they want to see that the levels are decreasing and that they're not using. With alcohol, I will tell you that, again, they're very sensitive levels. I had a positive alcohol test during one of the drug tests when I was at Liberty, and a parent called to tell me that there's no way their child drank alcohol, they were sick, and that they were drinking NyQuil the night before the test. And so I called the testing agency and asked that, if that could be true. He said it could be true, but given the levels of what the test would have been, she would have had to consume 17 bottles of NyQuil. So I called the parent back and asked if she drank 17 bottles of NyQuil, which she said no. But so the other part of it, the testing levels are very specific, and they are really able to gain a lot of information through that.
Is there random testing for employees, teachers?
I would like to bring up, and I talked to Kevin and Dr. Lucas about this, pre-employment testing.
Mm-hmm. Well, that would be, I guess, I'd be more than happy to turn it over to anybody else who'd like to.
But no, I think.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
I think Julie brings up, I think we as a board want to have, let's say, a more broad discussion about expanding the drug testing program in 2 ways.
Right, absolutely.
So one is pre-employment drug testing, like most major employers in Central Ohio. Your offer of employment is conditional upon passing an entry-level drug test. And then second, potentially expanding the program beyond just athletics. So
And it's
into co-curriculars and.
It's my understanding our bus drivers, through their CDL program, they already have to pass
They
the
are.
drug
And
test.
let me ask Gail Marsh to come up and talk about employee drug testing and give you a little bit of background on that as well.
Right.
Good evening. With regard to employee drug testing, there's 2 types of employee drug testing that's currently in place. The first of which is for CDL license holders, which affects mainly our bus driving staff, and that's in connection to Board Policy 4162, which is drug testing for CDL license holders. That testing is random, and it's also post-accident drug testing for all of our bus drivers. That also includes most of the office staff in both of our bus compounds. So our secretaries and supervisors and administrators in both those bus compounds also have CDLs, because in the event they need to be on the road or need to drive a bus, so they're also part of that pool. But again, that's random testing. That's conducted by Ohio Health, is our partner that works in that program, and also any accident, a bus accident, they're immediately sent for a drug test. The other piece of employee drug testing that is currently in place is reasonable suspicion testing for all employees. So for instance, if we had a reason to suspect, a supervisor, a manager, a principal had a reason to suspect an employee was under the influence, what would happen at that point is they would be request to go for a drug screen. Typically, we'd use Ohio Health because they're our partners. And if they refuse to go to for that reasonable suspicion testing, we would follow the normal discipline process and be able to draw a negative inference by the fact that they refused that, and that would be part of the discipline process. And of course, if they went for the drug screen, we'd have that information So that's the piece that's currently in place. So I'll try to answer any other questions you might have, or that's the part that's in place currently.
Dave?
Just to clarify, you said all employees?
All employees for the reasonable suspicion testing.
I see it as an employment workplace issue, a safety workplace issue, with the possibility of marijuana being on the ballot in Ohio, either this November or next November. The pre-employment, that's why I brought up to Kevin and Dr. Lucas and Linda, the possibility of pre-employment drug testing, because I know a lot of our employees in the state of Ohio are already doing that, and I see it as a workplace safety issue.
Sure. It's certainly something that, with the board's direction, we could research that process.
I think,
These
yeah, at a
specific
minimum,
questions.
we'd like to think about some choices, some alternatives that we could bring back to this group.
What would be some of the things that you would want in that report? Things like other districts, for example? Is that what you're?
Yeah, common practices, I'd say across the state of Ohio, both with employment and pre-employment, as well as athletic and non-athletic testing, are the two means by which we want to contemplate expanding.
Okay.
Because you're trying to see, is our current scope too narrow? Is it appropriate for us to expand that scope? And then secondly, I would, as about expansion of the program, want to think about and have this group look at, are we implementing the test in the most effective manner? So the protocol is appropriate, and other tests we should be considering along those lines. Because I don't think our current program covers performance-enhancing drugs.
The cost of that it goes from a $26 test to a $75 test. So that we haven't done that because it's been cost prohibitive. So, and the same thing with the alcohol test, incorporating the alcohol into every testing window is more expensive when they do the alcohol.
And that's what we need to kind of contemplate is, the level of investment versus
Right.
the effectiveness of the deterrent.
So you're looking for the potential cost of expansion?
And any other consideration, we think of cost plus unintended and intended consequences.
Mr. Rafe, if you would, I know we've addressed the piece of even expanding, for example, parking permits, things like that. You want to talk a little bit about that? I know you've talked with the athletic council
Yes.
in regard to some of that too.
Or
We-
co-curriculars?
Yeah, and we have talked with Athletic Council, which is obviously representative of the athletic community. We haven't presented that to, say, the music boosters or the theater groups or pop arts and that kind of group. But we can expand it because the law, the 1997 law of Vernonia v. Acton, that put it into place was it basically says that anybody who's in a position of high visibility or has some kind of standing in the school community, because they're in that, they're an influence on their peers. And drug use being a negative influence on their peers, that's why the Supreme Court allowed that to happen, the random testing of athletes. It has expanded to other areas, and from a safety standpoint, like parking permits, it's been permissible. It's a privilege. If you want the privilege, you have to submit to being in the random pool. We can't just do that. Just for I'm trying to find my email, Linda, from Matt about the.
Right there, Matt.
No, that's Matt Kelly. Sports Safe.
Real quick, while he's looking for some information for you, would you like some sample policy language as well to take a look at I have about 15 school districts in the state of Ohio that have some specific language related to student random testing. Would you like to take a look at that as well?
If I may,
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask a follow-up from that. I mean, I would assume those districts that have a deeper, wider policy like that also have some data on post-testing results and whether or not that has had an influence on reduction in use.
I can
I
check
don't know
with
if
those
that's
districts
available.
and see if that's available. That would be something of interest I'm sure you would want to look at.
And then as a sidebar for Mr. Rafe, then a question is so a student, let's say a student tests positive and then they have to test again 5 times in a row. Do we bear the cost of those 5 additional, or do their parents bear the cost of that?
Parents bear the cost of that.
Because again, the objective of the test isn't to get more suspensions. The objective of the testing is to get
Is to
reduced usage.
Well, and
Right,
we've,
to get them
so far
away.
this year, we've tested,
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sorry, so far this year, we've tested 1,056 student athletes from July 1st of 14 to April 9th of 15, 1,056. We've had 8 positive tests. So, you know, the debate is are we effective in our detection? Are we missing kids? Are we testing the right kids or what? Or is it truly doing what it's intended to do and acting as a deterrent for our student athletes? And will it in turn act as a deterrent for more kids if indeed we throw more kids into that random pool? I think we'd have to test more students because it reduces the likelihood if we expand the pool to all the people who get a driving permit and all the co-curriculars, the music and theater programs, then we'd have to expand our testing pool. So we would incur a greater cost. We've covered this cost through a fee-based system. So we may have to look at adjusting our fee structure in that regard.
Would part of the value or mission be, as mentioned with the OASIS program, to facilitate getting the students into a care program, not just a disciplinary program?
And we did change the policy a few years back because initially when we brought the policy in, it was a non-punitive policy. But what we were sensing over the years of administering the policy is that kids truly believed that there was a small enough random chance that they weren't going to be selected that they were going to take the chance anyway. So we modified the policy to have a loss of participation for a first random test.
I think that's important.
And we feel like that has helped because now the combination of the loss of participation with the likelihood of being tested has reduced our number of positives this year compared to previous years.
I would think that. I have a comment too, as a segue from what Linda just mentioned. I went through our policy manuals, and in addition to the one that she passed out this evening, all of these pieces of paper have to do with drugs, whether it's a student or a staff member. It's a lot. And I went through them, and I thought as I was going through them, I thought, given how heavy the policy, comprehensive the policies deal with it, if you agree, that perhaps we could ask the policy committee to take a look at this information while this investigation is going on as well. It's a diverse group. There's some great people on there. With Linda's expertise in particular, and as we pointed out over the last 3 years, on a particular subject that we're looking at for policy, in certain people that aren't always on the committee. And in fact, in this case, well, like Martha joined us more than once. And I would suggest, since I'm the only board member, that if you agree that it's, this might be a good approach, coinciding with the investigation, that Roger would join that as well, so there'd be 2 board members on that for that conversation. So just if you think that would be appropriate.
I also like Linda's idea of looking at other policies in other districts.
And that's a great way to start to blend all that information and bring it through that group.
So in essence, would be setting up a small team to look at current policies, other people's policies, getting input from administrators. I'd like to get input from students to really understand, do they really feel
Sure.
like it's
Right.
a deterrent or not?
Mhm.
And then take those groups and have them come back with some recommendations on potential changes.
Does this is the I'm sorry. When we have our meetings, sometimes when we're on something of this level of importance, if you will, we'll meet for an hour and a half.
Right.
And it'll be a long conversation. So we can get into a lot of depth.
What are you thinking timeline-wise? May meeting, I know we have an April 30 meeting. We have one meeting in May. I believe we have one meeting in June.
We have a retreat in June, if you'd like to talk about it at the
Yeah, we
retreat.
have
Maybe the
June?
June retreat.
June.
Something so we have
That's a
time
good-
to
that's a good
contemplate,
idea.
to put in
Because-
place
yeah.
by the next
Okay.
school
We
year.
also have a busy agenda of other things. too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So you'd be
Okay.
good, that'd give a good focus and more time.
So we are just from a standpoint of, we are not the norm in Central Ohio in terms of drug testing. We're one of the few that do. Us, Newark, Groveport, Lancaster. In most districts, so I don't know if the pendulum's going to swing back. Other districts only, like if they have a violation, a student athlete or even a student, then they have to go for further drug testing. So we're already well ahead of the curve in what we're doing, so, which is commendable.
I have a question on some of the numbers that were presented tonight. Under the student suspensions related to substance abuse, are those students caught with drugs on the premises or through our bringing the dogs through the schools or the drug tests, or how do those numbers, where do we get those suspensions from?
Variety of places, but the smallest percentage is from the K-9 searches, I can tell you that.
But it's all 3 high schools, all 5 middle schools.
But I think to be clear though, but these suspensions would be in addition to what we would find through drug testing. That
Or do
there
they
are-
include the drug testing?
The drug testing students do not, they have a loss of, if we hit them on a random drug test, those 8 that I said, those wouldn't be in these 44 because they wouldn't have had a suspension related to substance abuse because
Oh, okay.
it would have happened outside of school.
Thank you.
So those were only ones that were.
So
a
these
student-
are,
a student
something
came to-
happened on school
A
property or
student came to
during?
school under the influence, a
Yes.
student was in possession
Okay.
under the influence.
Those end up over in our office.
Okay.
Yeah, and as you know, the first offense for a drug violation is a 10-day suspension with a possibility of reduction to 5 days if the student and the family agree to counseling and an assessment from a certified chemical dependency counselor. If, and that's if they're in possession. If they're found to have been transmitting, giving drugs to one student, giving or receiving, that carries an automatic 10-day suspension with a recommendation for expulsion and no reduction. And the intent of that policy was always that somebody who's willing to sell is taking advantage of a student who may have a problem or is giving, that they're preying on somebody who, so that carries a further offense. The second offense violation is a 10-day suspension with a recommendation for expulsion.
Okay. Anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Yeah, Linda, you can stay. The next next discussion item on the agenda is item B, future planning. Linda and Krista Davis, please.
Thank you. And so I'm just going to remain up here and have my new 3 friends join me. And as you
Ms.
know,
Clark.
you'll be hearing from each of those. I have with me tonight Karen Clark. Don't fall down. Don't fall, Karen. Mark Iannata and Krista Davis. And as you are well aware, the district has frequently engaged in the redistricting process because as we would build a new building, we would define those attendance boundaries. And looking at the future build-out plans and future enrollment numbers, we recognize that our enrollment will still be increasing. However, we are not going to be building buildings anytime soon. So the question becomes, as some of those buildings increase, what's the impact in those certain attendance areas as opposed to maybe other attendance areas that are not growing as quickly or that are starting to decrease in numbers? And so this committee, this core committee that I have with me, the core members tonight, we have been discussing the idea of possibly shifting our thinking from the current redistricting process to a future planning of attendance boundary area process where we select individual volunteers through an application process, and we'll talk more about that, and we study those enrollment numbers and those attendance numbers in the buildings on a consistent basis for multiple years so that we can follow those growth patterns in the different attendance area boundaries of the district. So I'd like to turn it over to Karen first and talk a little bit more about this idea.
Great, thank you. Thank you. So appreciate your time on the agenda today. I'm excited to be back. And so for many of you, you remember Mark and I both co-chaired the redistricting committee when we opened Heritage Elementary School. So with this process, it's a little different. Like Linda said, there's no new building or future expansion on the horizon. However, we do know there's enrollment shifts, projected growth that we need to take a look at. So, just like we did with the last redistricting committee, the process will be to involve community involvement through an application process. And then we will meet with that committee beginning now in the spring through the fall, working closely with our finance and facilities committee to ensure we're in alignment with that. In regards to a timeline, we are prepared to open up that application process on Monday, the 13th, with a closure of April 24th, similar to what we did in the past, and then hope to have an announcement of that committee by the end of the first week of May. And then ongoing, so through the spring and summer, we'll meet with the team. We'll make a and our recommendation is hoped for by November to the superintendent with a recommendation. And then keep that committee, which is different than we did in the past, keep that steering committee together to meet periodically as enrollment changes or building needs change, to kind of keep that core team together for consistency purposes. And so I will turn it over to Mark. He's going to give you a little bit more about our intent and the vision of the group.
Good evening. Normally when I speak in front of the board, it makes people nervous because they sense that there's redistricting ahead. People frequently will, because of my involvement over the years, will ask me, when are we going to redistrict? Are we going to redistrict? And I have to be honest with them and tell them it's not if, but rather when. And recently, with the projections that DeYoung, Scott Leopold provided to the board, it's clear that the growth rate has dropped and we're not seeing that kind of need to build new buildings, but that growth from the past is aging, and that aging is causing problems at buildings across the district. And so this core group got together and we started talking about some of, adjustments that maybe needed to be made. And through the course of those discussions, what we realized was that there were so many factors that were unknown. Again, in the past, it's just growth. We're going to we're opening a building, we're opening 2 buildings, whatever the case may be. There's going to be redistricting, and we just have to efficiently allocate the students across those buildings. But that's not what's happening this time. Questions like whether or not we'll build a 5th high school, what can we do in terms of programs with Columbus State or things like that that might somehow or another reduce or maximize the use of our existing facilities, have all come into play. So rather than begin the process of redistricting, what we really said we needed to do was do more future planning. We needed to look at all of the options, all of the factors that are contributing to these problems in key or specific areas across the district. So what we've envisioned is that we'll create this committee of community members and staff that will really look at and consider all relevant factors and options. We're not taking any options off the table. Are there different ways that we could alleviate it other than building buildings? And the ultimate goal would be to provide some recommendation to the superintendent in light of Dr. Lucas's announcement of his retirement. We recognize too that we'll actually be doing this for a new superintendent, a superintendent who won't have the kind of the institutional memory of what's happened over the last 10, 15, 20 years. And so we're going to have to really do as much informing as we are recommending or explaining our recommendation. So how we're going to do that, one of the things we'll do, of course, will be to review in depth the young enrollment projections and review all current attendance boundaries for all buildings within the district. We'll then try to identify current and potential future attendance problems. We've already seen through the numbers that high schools, we're going to have different problems potentially at different high schools at different times. So, but there's still more, I think, things that we need to identify in terms of future potential problems. Then, like I said, what we want to do is consider all all options available to correct, or what I'll say alleviate, a situation that we might have in a particular school. We've already looked at Olentangy Meadows as an elementary school that's got some issues, and rather than again, do a big redistricting plan, is there a way that we could just alleviate that problem in that elementary school without really affecting the rest of the district? But those are things we'll have to do. The other thing we've recognized more than anything is that, again, because this is more of a big global picture, that we have to involve all of the other existing committees that the board currently has. The Facilities Committee, the Cost Savings and Efficiency Committee, the Finance and Audit Committees are all committees that have a great deal of expertise that can assist us in considering these options. We might throw an option out there that think it's a great deal, and then have the audit group look at it and say, or finance groups and say, no, that's not a viable option, and so we don't want to take that to the superintendent. So again, use that expertise of the various committees that already exist. Finally, as we've done in the past, we want to involve the community with forums. We're on holding a couple forums here in the fall. The functions of the forums are multiple. The first is just to inform them of the problem. Sometimes people don't even recognize, members in the community don't recognize that there's overcrowding in a school if that's not the school their children attend. So we have to first explain to them what the situation is. Then we have to explain to them, here are some of the options, and get their input on those options. And then we'll take that back to the smaller committee and analyze all those issues, put together a recommendation that we think is a reasonable resolution of the problem wherever it might be within the district. So that's really what our vision is, what our goal is, and ultimately the way we hope to accomplish that.
Thanks, Mark, Karen, Linda. I would first like to say that it has been a privilege to work with these three who have so much experience with redistricting and our school district in general, to know what to look at, what aspects are important to consider as we look at something so important as attendance boundaries and the future of our district. So sometimes, as Mark said, people get scared when you start talking about redistricting. I think we actually embrace the conversation because there's so much depth of experience behind this group and the folks that we've worked with in the past. As Karen mentioned, both Mark and Karen co-chaired the Heritage Project most recently. As we start to look at future planning, we know that this is different. We aren't building new buildings, and so therefore this is not a committee that is project-based, but rather long-term standing committee that looks at not only that one building and that one situation, but many, many facets. And as you've heard from both of them this evening, we know that it's important to not only look at our growing population, our enrollment shifts in different parts of the district, but also to collaborate with the facilities, the cost savings and efficiency committee, and the finance and audit committee. So we know that this is definitely a different era, and it's so important to work with these groups as we move forward with our timeline. As was mentioned before, I'll just briefly explain. The timeline would be to open an application process similar to what we did in the most recent effort with redistricting, to allow any community member to step forward and participate. We found that the last project we worked on was very successful, and we would like to take those components and put them in this new future planning model. So we want to encourage participation through the application process, but also, as Mark mentioned, the forum process. So there will be many opportunities for involvement, from being on a committee to participating on a one-night forum, and also participating by sending in responses through the website, email, etc. So it will really be an opportunity for people to participate in the next 6 months or so with whatever is available in their time frame. After that recommendation is made to the superintendent in November, this committee would continue to meet quarterly, because we recognize that this, again, is not a project-based effort, but a long-term future planning process that we need to look at. So as enrollment shifts throughout the district, and as Mark was mentioning, the high schools will have different issues at different times. We know that all levels, elementary, middle, and high school, will need that type of attention. So we also want to engage members of these other committees to come to the future planning committee meetings and participate and bring their expertise so that it can really be a comprehensive process. So with that, I would like to open it up for questions for any of us to hopefully help clarify about what the intent is and where we'll go from here.
I have a general comment and question. If I was a betting man, I would say that Dave's going to ask the same questions.
Okay.
So, as members of the Facilities Committee, we've asked the Facilities Committee to take on a similar parallel task. My comment is mostly a suggestion. You're going to go solicit people to participate. I guess I would encourage and ask fellow board members, same thing as a unified mission, a unified statement or vision statement, something so that your message that goes out to the public is mirroring what all the committees are trying to do in this and what their participation is in that process. Because it's a lot of volunteers, it's a lot of brain power working on this same focus. And I'll let Dave comment after me, but the output that you'll have from this, I think, is going to have tremendous value. So the more you can be aligned on what your mission is, I think the greater your outcome has potential to be and be successful then. So
That's well said. So I'll just add a pragmatic item.
Okay.
Just in case you don't know, and as Roger can attest, they've been working on this ever since we first brought it to the committee, Facilities Committee. And they've gone through a process where they actually have in a document, which Jeff can share with you if you don't already have it. But they've looked at, what, a dozen, Jeff, alternatives, options on how to deal with growth from a physical perspective. I think that would be a useful document for you to have.
Great. We'll definitely do that.
It's still an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, so I guess, from my perspective, so I support the establishment of the committee. I want to make sure that its purpose is very specifically delineated, and frankly, even the name of it feels a little vague to me. In my mind, it's the attendance planning committee. It's not the future planning, because frankly, the future planning is the role of this board in terms of broad-based strategic planning for the district. And I think this group should be very specifically charged with attendance planning and plugging that work into facilities, into a lot of what you guys said. And the more narrowly we can define it, and specific we can be, and clear we can be, we won't have issues of scope creep and et cetera. So we make sure we keep the focus very clear, very specific.
Yeah. But I also want to point out that by Ohio law, it's the superintendent's decision
Clear.
to make
Yeah.
for any attendance boundaries.
Yeah, because my other question too is, should it really be a superintendent's committee?
Absolutely,
This one is.
because, yes, absolutely, because the superintendent by law is the one who draws attendance boundaries. And that has always been the case, except for the first redistricting that was done, and that was done through the Citizens Advisory Committee. And that, at the time, was a board committee, and it was later found out by a previous board member that the board cannot make a redistricting decision. It has to be the decision of the superintendent to make attendance boundary decisions per Ohio law. And so then it came out of the Citizens Advisory Committee. It became a superintendent committee. The redistricting committee was a superintendent committee. They don't make decisions, they make recommendation to the superintendent. He shares those ideas with us. We can certainly provide input, but the final decision is that of the superintendent. And I will say, when he came in, he was thrown in his lap the whole Berkshire issue.
I'm not familiar with that.
Yes.
What was that?
And so
Trying to wipe that out of my mind.
So I strongly support this, because with the new superintendent coming in, whether they're from California or, somewhere here in central Ohio, they have no historical background of what has transpired since. And there are a lot of things that you do not want to do when doing configuration because of what has been done historically. And so I think that's where this group can really help. I don't care what you call it. You can call it the Green Committee. I do agree it has to have a specific set of visions, and it has to be under the superintendent because of Ohio law.
See, my only comment says, the fact that the superintendent makes the decision, he can take recommendations from anybody. In terms of the means
And
by
so
which you
we can
determine
give
what the boundaries are
recommendations
going to
to
be, that could be from a board committee, it could be from a superintendent's committee. So the fact that it's board or superintendent isn't really governed by Ohio Revised Code. The fact that it's his decision is, right? So whether it's a
His
board
or
committee.
hers.
Thank you, his or hers. So in my mind, if finance is under the school board, facilities under the school board, I would assume attendance would be under the school board, and then that superintendent, he or she can then determine how they take that recommendation from that committee.
But this is nothing we ever vote on,
Correct.
Yeah.
But we can advise and recommend.
right, to the
But we don't
committee?
vote. That's correct.
Or to the superintendent?
Ultimately, it's the superintendent. I learned that very clearly. It's the superintendent's decision
Yes.
on boundaries.
On those individual building problems, I like that, the taking responses maybe from the people that are in it, like the parents and the teachers, have like a pre-made form, like standard questions, and then a freehand section from the people who are in there every single day, and coming up from that way.
Yeah, we've done that in
Yeah.
the past. That's how we've always.
The community
we would
forums are
really-
always.
The community forums are huge, get a lot of information from
We would
that.
definitely do that.
One response, actually, to your point, Kevin, was in terms of the input of the board. And one of the things we really didn't mention, but we considered in the past, the parameters by which we
True.
came up with the redistricting proposal came from the board. And that's one of the things we even talked about, are the parameters that we used in the previous redistricting periods appropriate still in the future. So it may be that this committee, in getting together and talking about some more things, will actually need to come back to the board and actually make a recommendation that the board provide some new guidelines, parameters for whatever adjustments we might make.
Yes. Yeah.
And so we would be back, we would be getting the input of the board. It will have clearly a role in the process, even though ultimately it's the superintendent's decision.
And I think to be clear, we're kind of arguing over semantics, right? So
Right.
where it resides, what it's named,
Sure.
right? So
But good points.
it's an important role, it's an important committee, it'll do great work. Now let's just make sure that we set it up for success.
And Julie's
Absolutely.
caveat is always too, to our friends in the media, that it's not a redistricting committee, okay? So let's make sure that's clear.
Right.
okay?
It's not,
Yeah.
correct.
And the parameters that Mark spoke about, we used to have a parameter where all buildings had to be equally balanced.
Yes.
And we quickly learned that you really upset a lot of people, because they would rather you fit in that 25th desk in that classroom for their child, than to make sure every building has 600 kids.
Yeah.
And so, by setting the parameters, I can agree that the board can set the parameters. We just have to watch our shalls and mays. And you don't want to tie hands too much, because then you start infringing on what the community wants. And quite frankly, they want a community school.
And the Facilities Committee is quite aware that the term parity is no longer a criteria point.
Right.
That's out of the picture.
And so I guess maybe a question is, so the responsibility for the development and socialization of the enrollment projections, where we did it both ways, today kind of resides within the Facilities Committee. Would we assume that stays there?
Yes.
I would say it.
I would say
think it
yes.
does.
Oh,
Just work collaboratively.
Yes, and they would
Extract
pass
the
them
data.
on.
I think that's what they've always done, even with
Correct.
redistricting.
oh yeah, we've always taken their
Yes.
numbers.
Yes.
I mean, there's clearly an overlap, and, getting you made earlier and to follow up with the point you made, I actually made a note of how does this committee, in the work of this committee and its results, tie into the strategic planning effort that the board is responsible for. So I made a note of that's something we want to be thinking about carefully. There's clearly an overlap and collaboration.
Right.
It's the good problem with having so many volunteers, isn't it?
It is, you get a lot of good thinking.
And remember too, we are in a position of having our volunteers do this at a time when we're not up against a deadline or a
Yeah.
wall. So from an options selection standpoint, we appreciate what you're going to give to the superintendent, whoever that person may be, and the board, because we're not being pressed. We're asking for your help in looking into that future, so.
And that's a key point. But the other thing I was going to mention regarding the duplication of efforts, that duplication really stems from the fact that originally development and redistricting were one committee. Really, they were, development was born out of redistricting in terms of how we came up with the projections, and then ultimately when we realized we were going to need to build so many buildings and how we built those buildings, that's really where the facilities or the development committee really came into existence. So there's clearly been duplication along the way, but it just stems from the fact that they really started together. And again, nobody wants to, reinvent the wheel. To the extent we have information from Project 2020 that we can use.
Yeah, that's right.
From other programs that we can use. Again, the idea was that we have a more regular committee that can consider all factors, all relevant, options. Again, as you said, Roger, when it's not a controversy, when it doesn't absolutely have to be done. And so, we want to kind of a lot of the fears of a lot of the current, residents that we're not talking about redistricting right now. We're talking about putting in place a mechanism that in the future we can maybe come up with solutions that are the least adverse to students within the district.
Right.
And someone, I don't know if it was Karen that said it, but our parents want to know.
Yeah,
They want to be
absolutely.
informed, they want to be kept informed of the process, and they want to have the chance to comment, and when we are in this time of working this way, not against the wall. So what you're going to do will be a great benefit to the parents as well.
Nice.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, the last discussion item is Mr. Gordon on district fiber services contract.
Good evening. We are bringing this contract forward at this time because there's been a change in how we receive these services. Previously, TRECA has, on our behalf, signed contracts and filed for E-rate. And now that some of the laws have changed with the E-rate funding, TRECA has changed the way they're doing business, and they're going from being somebody that represents us for E-rate, or for fiber, to a group that now is bidding on our fiber contract. So to continue to get our E-rate funding, we need to go through a process of filling out a 471 through the E-rate bid process.
Spend a minute on what E-rate is.
Okay, E-rate is a state program that began as an effort to get technology into school districts years ago, and it started out phones, computers, those type of things. In the past, our cell phones or district phones have been part of that. With the new laws, that goes away because they're moving more towards getting fiber, getting other technology in the building, wireless, those things. So to free up money for those other items, they've eliminated some of the phone things previously. So falling under that for us, the biggest part of that contract for us, or the biggest part of the E-rate reimbursements, are our fiber contract. And so that going to the fiber, TRECA has provided that service for us as part of a consortium. They have bid out our fiber services, signed the contracts on our behalf, which fell under our master service agreement with TRECA. Now that they've become a provider, we had to bid out that service through what's called the 471, which is the bid process for the E-rate funding. So we've gone through that process. TRECA, which is now combining with the MEC and is now called META. So when you see it next month, at the next meeting, it'll be called META instead of TRECA, so that'll be something that's a little bit different. But in order to receive our E-rate reimbursements, we need to have a contract with META, the winner of the fiber bid, for those services. So it no longer will fall under our master services agreement. It's a specific contract for those services. And so that's just, again, we're getting it basically in the same place, through the same people. It's still consolidated. It's just they've had to go through a different process to be awarded that business and then allow us to get our reimbursement. And our reimbursement on that, by the way, for E-rate, somewhere between like 40 and 45%. And it changes yearly based on different figures and numbers, but usually has stayed in that area for us.
So what's the expected size of the contract? It's about $500,000?
Just under that.
When you say reimbursement, so we in essence consume services and then we get a discounted rate for using it through?
Well, we consume the services and then we get a check, a reimbursement back. So we pay for the services, then we get a reimbursement check back. And oddly enough, the reimbursement check for things like, for example, Verizon with the phones, they actually send us the check back. So we pay them, and we've gone through the E-rate, then they send us a check back for that service.
Okay.
And so in this case, it would be META
It's in essence the way of affecting a volume discount, right? You pay a bid rate, and then based upon your specific experience and usage, you get a refund?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
It's an annual contract?
This will be a 5-year contract, and the reason for that is obviously with the cost of putting the infrastructure in for the fiber, they've got to make it a successful model for the bidder, they need a longer-term contract.
But then we lock in.
But then we lock in that rate.
Okay. So this will be an action item potentially if we want to move forward at the next business session?
Yes.
Yeah.
Any other questions? No?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Okay, agenda item 11, public participation session number 2 regarding action items.
There's none.
All right, Mr. Kern, will you present the treasure action items, please?
Pull out B for me, please.
B, okay. Let's go ahead and treasure action items approval for A, C, and D. A is approved minutes for the February 26th, March 12th, March 21st, and March 24th board meetings. C would be approve amended FY15 appropriations at the fund level, and D, approve donations to the district.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? No? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Fiesel,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. Bartz,
Yes.
Mr. White,
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien.
Yes, so treasure action items A, C, and D pass 5-0.
And then finally, treasure action item B, approve financials for February 2015.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on the financials? Call the roll.
Mr. Bartz?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mrs. Fiesel,
Yes.
Mr. White?
No.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes, so the financials pass 4-1. Dr. Lucas, want to present superintendent action items?
As to present superintendent action items
Pull
A
up
through
five.
F as
A5 and
amended,
7.
please.
I think he wants to pull,
Hey, which ones?
I was
which ones,
finished.
please?
A5 and 7.
A5
So-
and A7.
So A5 is employment of certified, so teachers, and the new teacher academy stipend, is that correct, Mr. White?
Yes.
So do we want to
Present the rest.
present those two first and then present the rest?
Your call.
Okay. Asked to present superintendent action item A5 and 7 for approval, please.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, please call the roll.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mrs. Fiesel,
Yes.
Mr. Bartz?
Yes.
Mr. White?
No.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes, so those items pass 4-1.
Asked to present the remaining items of superintendent action items as amended, please.
So moved.
Seconded.
Any discussion? Okay, call the roll, please.
Mrs. Fiesel,
Yes.
Mr. Bartz?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. White?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes. Okay, I will now enter a motion to move into executive session pursuant to the Ohio Revised Code to consider the employment of a public employee and to consider matters required to be kept confidential by federal law and regulations and state statutes. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
No, good. Asking for a second, Dave provided. Any discussion? Okay, the only other, we will not be taking any action when we return. We will only return and adjourn. So please call the roll.
Mrs. Fiesel,
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Bartz?
Yes.
Mr. White?
No.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes. So the motion to move into executive session passes 4-1. Next meeting is April 9th. 30th?
Today's the night.
Today is the night.
We're already here. We're going to do another meeting.
And it's at Olentangy High School.
And all-
At the auditorium, right?
And before I
Yes.
forget, can we make sure that